Attention, ladies, and anybody using a dating app in hopes of finding a significant other. Pay close attention to the story I'm about to share with you because it can happen to anybody, anywhere. This particular incident took place the last week of January 2023. What started out as a welfare check by a concerned friend could potentially have saved the life of this woman in Grants Pass, Oregon. We don't know what the red flags were. We just know that the woman had been missing for a couple of days when her friend decided to go to her house and knock at her door. Now, what she found on the other side of the door is probably anybody's worst nightmare if you live by yourself. The victim had been kidnapped in her own home, tied down, tortured, and brutally beaten. Luckily, the concerned friend was not injured, and when she knocked at the door, the suspect ended up fleeing. When authorities came to the scene, he was nowhere in sight, and this initiated a manhunt that lasted almost a week. Authorities identified the suspect as Benjamin Foster, and they believed his intention was to kill the woman that day. During the course of their investigation, they put out a call out to the community asking anybody who was using a dating app to be on the lookout for Foster, who they believed was using the dating apps to find his next potential victim or somebody that could help him elude being captured. They also asked for the community to take a close look at his picture, since he could have changed the way he looked by changing his hair color, cutting his hair, and also getting rid of his beard. During the time that he was on the run, they put a timeline. And they believe shortly after he left the house or the community where he kidnapped this woman, that he traveled up north to a nearby city. And he entered the home of two men who he ended up killing both. But before he left the scene, he ended up taking some stuff from there, key items that would later tie him back to this crime scene, which was described as gruesome. He ended up taking a couple of items, among them the victim's dog. Now, around the same time of these two homicides, they believe they came very close to capturing Foster. They felt they had him cornered inside of this home, and they had officers all around it. But somehow Foster managed to call a cab company. He called the taxi, ended up slipping out of the house and jumped into this cab. And of course, the cab driver didn't know who he was taking and took him to the next location. It would be a couple of days later for authorities to get the next big tip. And it came from one of the neighbors of the victim that had been kidnapped. She stated that she saw a man who she believed was Foster walking a dog in front of her house, and she caught these images through a Ring camera. By the time authorities came, they called all sorts of agencies, and they went straight to the house. And the SWAT came out. Anybody working this case came out to help in capturing the suspect. They also asked the community to shelter in place and to stay in their house until the situation was resolved. When the SWAT team came in, the different agents were looking for Foster, assuming that he was hiding in the house. And it took them a while because Foster was not hiding in the house. He somehow dug a tunnel underneath the house, and that's where he hid. Days later, they discovered that he had enough supplies to be able to survive underneath that tunnel for a couple of days. So, as with any case where they're looking for a fugitive, they call out the SWAT team. And of course, the SWAT negotiators started trying to communicate with him, trying to put a peaceful resolution to the situation. And they soon realized that Foster was not communicating with them. He was not cooperating. So they had to take an additional step. They decided to send a robot with a camera. And when they received the first images, they noticed that Foster was armed. And of course, this put them on alert, and they prepared for the worst, especially since they had seen how gruesome and violent he had been in the previous two incidents. So they were preparing for the worst. They were preparing to go at it with him in a shooting spree. And somehow they were surprised when they saw that Foster took the gun, put it to his head, and shot himself. And it would take them a couple of minutes to be able to go into the hole that he dug to retrieve them. And while they were retrieving him, they noticed that he was still breathing. So they ended up taking him to a nearby hospital where he died. Later that day, authorities gave a press conference in which they kind of gave a timeline of what he did while he was on the run. They stated that they had detained this woman, arrested her, and they charged her with assisting him in eluding being captured. They didn't give details as to how they met or anything else about the woman. And they also took the time to clarify that the first victim that Foster had kidnapped had been in some sort of relationship, domestic relationship with him, because as soon as the story came out, local media started reporting that possibly Foster had met his victim on one of the dating apps. And so they had to clarify that they were in a relationship. As a news reporter, this type of stories terrify me, and I tend to cover issues like this. And I also know that dating apps aren't screened for background checks. Anybody could create and open a profile on one of these dating apps, and there's no background checks. You could make up a name, age, education, background, and steal somebody's picture. And it's often common to see a man forget to take off his wedding ring and take pictures and post them and then claim that he's single. So I know the dangers that exist behind these apps, behind these profiles. And as a news reporter, hearing this story and hearing other stories similar, it really scares me. And that's why I decided to start Detective Podcast. My name is Karime, and I'm your host. I will be teaching in the next couple episodes how you could utilize in public records certain apps and even phone numbers, apps that verify phone numbers. I'm going to be teaching you how you could prevent and do some sort of investigation to avoid a heartache or avoid being in a dangerous situation with a stranger. I'm going to be teaching you step by step, and I'm going to start with this case. Considering how quick authorities were able to identify Benjamin Foster and stating that the victim had been in some sort of domestic relationship, and assuming that they did know something about each other, you would know the last place that Foster lived in. And considering he lived in Las Vegas is one of those cities that you're always going to brag about. People who lived in New York, Miami, Houston, Dallas, LA, or Vegas, they're going to brag about living in these cities. So assuming that this victim knew the guy's name, Benjamin Foster, and knew he lived in Vegas, those two key pieces of information, we could just go to our friend Google and we could search what county is Las Vegas in. And it's going to take a few seconds to tell you that it's in Clark County. So the next page I'm going to go to, because anytime I want to find criminal background, I want to find if a person has a marriage license, has any information of eviction, have they been evicted in the past, are they sex offenders, do they have any court cases, are there any anything I want to know, I tend to go to the clerk of courts. So you go to the county, Clark County, and then you put clerk of courts. And go back to your friend Google and put Clark County Clerk of Courts and then do search. So I go to record search and viewing, and then using the one piece of information that I knew, Benjamin Foster, I'm going to put Foster, Benjamin, and click. And then within a few seconds, I find that he has a case here in 2019. I'm going to click on that case, and it's going to tell me the plaintiff, Foster Benjamin, also gives me details, the judge, the hearing events, what happened in each hearing. And basically, after looking at it, I could tell that it was a domestic violence incident. Reading the details of it she or anybody who searched him would have found out that Benjamin Foster had a case that was dismissed in 2021 with a domestic violence charge. And basically, Foster took his then girlfriend and kidnapped her in her apartment for 2 weeks, and also pretty much did the same thing that he did to this victim in Oregon. And it only took a few minutes. Knowing how dangerous these apps are, it's crazy to me that you would go to a total stranger's home and agree to go in there and you don't know what you're going to encounter, or vice versa, let these people come into your house. As a reporter who I have done cover so many criminal cases, it just blows my mind that, we don't think to research before you agree to meet somebody. And because of that, I decided I wanted to start this podcast to teach the tricks and traits that I've learned over the past 12 years as a news reporter, teach it to anybody who's listening. I ask that you share this podcast with anybody that you know uses dating apps, anybody that you care for, anybody that could benefit from this. And I also encourage you to stay tuned to the next episodes where I'm going to teach you different tricks to investigate using apps, using your phone numbers. And I'm going to teach you how to reverse it. How do you hide, or how can you be careful instead of giving your real number? How can you give a different number? How can you communicate using different apps with people without giving your real information? These things, you would think everybody knows them, but the more I read on cases that have come out in the news, the more I listen or read what's being exchanged in different dating groups, it just scares me that not everybody knows the basic. And that's why I want to teach you. So I encourage you to share this podcast. Stay tuned. Come back and listen to the next episodes. Share with your friends. Follow Dicktective on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And also, if you have any questions, I encourage you to email me at dicktectivepodcast@gmail.com, where I'm going to be reading and hearing your concerns and seeing how I could help you investigate. I am that friend. I became that friend that because of what I did for a job, I became the trusty friends that my girlfriends would send me pictures or send me names and ask to do a quick background check of the guy they were about to see to make sure that he wasn't going to be having, end up being the character of a story because of, potential dangers that that guy could represent to them. So I became that friend. I became the one that investigated or investigates. So if you already don't have a friend and you want to become that friend, I'm going to teach you how to do it. So I encourage you to stay connected to Dicktective, and I'm going to teach you how you can investigate pretty much anybody using tools that are already out there and available to the public. So I encourage you to come and stay tuned. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Karima Hernandez. Stay tuned.